I should share this on Facebook.
Live on Facebook.
All right, and let me just navigate back over here.
Are you typing it? I'm just going to share your thoughts.
All right, looks like we are indeed live. All right, yeah, let's get started. I just want to say again, welcome to our guest tonight. We're really happy that you're here. Welcome to everyone else who watched the film earlier and you're here for the Q&A session. My name is Amanda. I'm one of the volunteers at the Harvey Milk Festival and the Fabulous Independent Film Festival. And for those of you who are out there in Facebook watching us live tonight, we just finished the opening night film of Pier Kids, and we have with us tonight the director and producer of that film to talk a little bit about it. If you didn't get a chance to watch that film yet, there is a link in the description of this video for you to do that. And you can also get your pass for this year's entire virtual film festival. There's over 10 feature films and 11 shorts that we're sharing this year with you. So go ahead and check that out when you get the chance. And before we get started, first with the questions that people might have on Zoom and on Facebook, can we go ahead and get you guys to just introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about who you are, a little bit about the film and your backgrounds?
Sure.
My name is Elegance Bratton. I'm the director and writer of Pier Kids, in addition to being the cinematographer, a producer, and many other hats I have enough humility not to claim credit for. I guess that's not really humble when you say that you are humble. So I don't know how that can be interpreted, but I'm really excited to share this work with you in Sarasota, and I'm grateful that you took the time to watch it, especially with everything that's going on in the world. So welcome and thank you.
I am Chester Arturnal Gordon. I am the producer of Pier Kids. I also did other things on the film. It was a labor of love type of film. And yeah, I'm excited to be here with you today. I used to live in Pensacola, Florida. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's great. We're very happy to have you both with us. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you guys about that I had when watching the film is early on, some people that you interviewed described this place as like a fairy tale, but you quickly learned that there's kind of a dark side to this fairy tale. They kind of described it as, I think, a fairy tale or virtual reality kind of place, this pier. Were there any revelations from the people that you talked to that shocked you?
Oh, you mean outside of what was in the film or within the film?
Within and without too, just, those conversations that you were having. I know, Elegance, I was reading that you yourself experienced homelessness. So maybe kind of talk a little bit about your experiences, how they compare and contrast with the individuals that you feature in this film.
In terms of my own experience, I was dealing with it from like 1996 until like 2005. I was dealing with homelessness. So for me, I think one of the big differences is like the services. There really was not a nonprofit industrial complex like the HIV, AIDS epidemic and tragedy that occurred. It was when in 96, the protease inhibitors had just gotten there. So when I was coming out, I think the political movement was so consumed with the protease inhibitors and like for good reason that it didn't really like people. Basically, what I'm theorizing here, I'm by no means claiming any facts, but it feels like what happened is that once people got the life-saving drugs, the nonprofits changed their focus and started to provide services to homeless queer youth that were not available to me when I was coming out. So one of the reasons why I felt so compelled to tell this story is because I feel like, queer people of color, trans people, we Black people especially, like, have been kind of left out of the gay rights conversation because of a movement that kind of, I imagine in the wake of the HIV crisis, was really concerned with establishing like a shared sense of humanity. And they felt much more confident doing that without us being at the front of it. So as a result, I feel like the movement really didn't reach my household growing up. I come from a very working class, very blackity, black background. And it just felt like I was on my own to explain myself to my family. So, remembering that, I think one of the bigger differences in how I came up and how the kids on the pier today come up is the advent of social media. People have the ability to tell their story and be heard by, millions of people. So I was really inspired by these young people and their willingness to kind of put themselves out there. And that inspiration led to this film.
I'd like to open it up to questions. Those of you who are on Zoom, if you have any questions, I've got a ton myself while I was watching it, but definitely want to take this time. If you guys have anything you'd like to ask Chester or Elegance, please go ahead and type that in the chat. Can you, obviously this is like a really important film. There's so much going on socially right now where, we want to amplify the voices of queer and Black people. Can you talk maybe a little bit about, that experience of being a minority within a minority, and also maybe talk a little bit more about the experiences of the people in the film and the perspective that they have, and maybe also why you chose to focus on the people that you did throughout the documentary?
Sure. I always say that the young people that are depicted in Pier Kids, the participants, they exist in the blind spot of a colorblind society where race and sexuality overlap and compound, and the end result is either a premature death, imprisonment, or if you can vogue really well or you can write films, you might be able to take the pain of being invisible and turn it into something that others can rally behind. So, my experience as a Black person who is also gay, it has meant that I have spent most of my life between a rock and a hard place, and that the culture, when I look at Breonna Taylor and what's happening with George Floyd in these protests, I think white Americans are having to face the fact that they have to give up some of what they have gotten out of this deal. We are on stolen Lenape lands in New York City. There is a long history in this country of the usurpation of people's labor, people's identities, right? And as a result, every single law in this country is designed with racism in it. So it's not just about or only about going to apply for the job. It is also about the influence when it comes to your aspirations outside of this white supremacy on the most basic and fundamental level, right? So that's the Black part of it, right? And then as a gay person, I am a part of a family, my biological family. I've wrestled with this a lot. My mother recently passed. So I've been in a moment where I've been very much thinking about how I came up and how my sexuality, I don't want to say it played a role because I'm not blaming myself for anything, but the ways in which homophobia in my own household created this schism between me and the people who should have loved me. Like, I would not be in this world if it wasn't for them. So you would think that they would have had a bit more, care. But, in my household, I really do feel that my mother, being a single parent at the age of 16 in the 80s, her whole thing was the villainization of Black women on welfare, young teen Black moms. And that mixed with Christianity created something where she didn't want to create a bad citizen. She didn't want to prove the Reagan administration right. She didn't want to prove middle America right about what happens when single Black mothers raise boys who become social pariah, either criminals or an inability to kind of experience the American dream through making a family, a heterosexual family. So in this way, my sexual identity and my race compounded together to push me out of my house into a world that is inherently anti-Black. And I have had to navigate those circumstances since before I knew how to ever say my own name. And I still navigate those circumstances now, even as my career takes off and I'm having opportunities like this. Because ultimately, fundamentally, at the molecular structure of this society has always been one where white heterosexual men are number one. They are the only people who've ever experienced the true promise of the American dream and the limitless possibilities of what freedom in a democratic society is supposed to equate to. Everyone else is experiencing less of that based off of the intersecting identities that they hold within them. And I'll let you speak about the kids on the pier.
Yeah. What was the question about the kids on the pier?
Just like how the kids on the pier. Wait, actually, what was the question about the kids on the pier? I'm sorry, I went off there a little bit.
Unmute myself might help. Just about that experience of being a minority within a minority, and Elegance, you brought up a really great point, about something in the film that you also sort of portray is that struggle within the families of the kids, grappling with their gender identity or their sexuality, and trying to reconcile these religious beliefs. We saw that with Krystal's family. So maybe just talking a little bit more about that experience of being a minority within a minority, and those compounding pressures of how those things intersect.
Sure. I think that being a minority within a minority for the kids that socialize on the pier and that call the pier their home, it's hard because the pier it's been a gentrified neighborhood since the late 90s or like mid 90s, I think. When they started to reconstruct the pier and to add businesses along the waterfront. And since they've done that, the apartments and the people who they advertise to live in that neighborhood are typically white, lower upper class families, I guess, like pretty rich, I guess, but not like,
there are some very rich people in rich housing.
Well, yeah, exactly. It could be like they're really rich. It's between really rich to like,
basically rich.
Yeah, basically rich. Basically, but you're rich.
Yeah.
And, the kids are right there. And, they're police now. And they have a curfew set on the pier. And, they're not allowed a lot of restaurants or things where they could afford things at. They close, so they can't be there. And, they've made it uncomfortable for, and it's almost like, it's like when Warhol, always compare the pier to when Andy Warhol talks about the social network, because of the pier, I think, is a social network. It's a network that these kids use, and a lot of, and Christopher Street itself is a social network for all gay people, for white, Black, everybody, because of, Stonewall, all that stuff. But it's there, but especially for people of color, because they're homeless there. And but
and they're also
they're making money too, because it's a red light district.
Right.
So because it's a red light district and they know to find gay people here, people who may not be out of the closet or identify as gay, or who will employ these people to have sex with them. All of them LGBTQ people, they know where to find them because this is where they hang out, and they know that they're homeless there too.
And I just want to kind of underline this idea of gentrification. Like, gentrification, to me, in my experience on the pier, is a code word for ethnic cleansing. It is the prioritization of property over people, and people who are deemed to devalue property are no longer welcomed in public space. So, how does race and sexuality interact on the pier? Well, when gentrification comes in, you have a police force that, at least since 1969, at least since the Stonewall Rebellion, started by, two trans women of color, Sylvia Rivera, Puerto Rican, and Marsha P. Johnson, a Black woman, right? And mind you, Sylvia was Marsha's daughter. Marsha found Sylvia when she was 12 years old, homeless after her family kicked her out, and realized that she needed a certain amount of guidance. So that radical love becomes the bedrock of what causes the Stonewall Rebellion to occur, right? And why did it need to happen? Because the police in that space have always had a hyper fixation on people of color in this public space. And that's in 1969. So imagine the NYPD, who has strangled and murdered and choked and beaten and cut up so many Black people, like hundreds of them. The ones the ones the names of are one thing. There are so many more whose names you will never know. But this has happened to.
These protests have been happening since the 80s.
And the thing is that under this world of gentrification, like, another fact about New York City today, since 9/11, it is illegal for more than two people to congregate on any street corner in New York City. So how do you think that impacts Black queer kids who require Christopher Street, not only like Chester is saying, like, yes, it is socializing, but this is a social network. Critical resources are being passed between these young people: housing, employment, whether, all sorts of employment are being passed along, mental health care, either in the form of, drug use and partying, or access to actual services. So in an environment that is gentrifying, where poor people are automatically kind of assumed to be a nuisance just by virtue of being outside, in a racist society that has when slavery ended, 4 million Black people became homeless, and then they made homelessness illegal. And hence the prison industrial complex that we live with today. So you add all that up, and what it means is that these kids exist in the actual blind spot of a colorblind and racist society. They are the ones who are getting victimized. They are getting terrorized by institutions that, in a just world, would be concerned with helping them. That is that, and to be in the middle of that as a young person, imagine how that absolutely can rip apart any true sense of, like, self-empowerment, self-identity. And what this film does, it celebrates these kids for refusing to allow the way that they are treated by the world to crush their creativity and their ability to share love with one another.
Yeah, one of the most shocking things that one of the things that shocked me most in the film was when one of the young men that you were talking to mentioned, thinking about becoming HIV positive because that would give him access to more resources. And Elegance, you said that there seems to be more resources now for these young people than when you were on the streets, but it still seems like there's a lot lacking, and there's that prioritization of buildings and profit over these kids who need a lot of help and are hurting. So what is it that we can do? There's a lot of protests going on, but as far as, like, moving the needle, in changing things at an institutional and a systemic level? Like what do you think we can be doing to help?
I don't know.
That's
I'll
a
be honest.
big one.
It's huge. Like like, you know, when I get this question, typically, and I mean this honestly, on an individual level, in terms of our queer rank, first of all, 2 trans women of color gave us gay rights. They gave us gays in the military. They gave us gay marriage. And those 2 political movements created the possibility of an organization like ACT UP coming along when we needed absolutely radical and transgressive behavior to stay alive, right? And I look at how white gay men responded with ACT UP when their lovers were dying of HIV and AIDS, right? And then I look at the fact that at least since 1969, queer youth of color, queer youth, it doesn't even matter what your race is. In America, there are 2 million homeless people. Almost half of them are queer kids, and half of them are Black kids, right? So when I look at how the gay white men responded during the AIDS crisis, and I look at how they're responding to this homelessness crisis that has outpaced AIDS for, like, you know, HIV's only been around for 30 years. This homelessness has been around for 50 years. I ask myself, I say that those same radically trained white gay men who, if you listen to Peter Staley or listen to Larry Kramer, a lot of what gave them the ammunition to be, a lot of their ammunition to be so transgressive and radical came from their class privilege and educational access. A lot of these guys went to Princeton and Harvard and Yale. Peter Staley himself is I think he's a retired financier of some kind on Wall Street, right? They had a lot of resources to pull, and they realized that they were in rooms together. And they're like, you know, we have all these resources. We don't have to live like this. We don't have to be treated like this. And they were right. Keep that same energy for homeless queer kids of color and queer kids in general. There is no gay rights movement. Anything you think, like if anything Trump America should teach progressive minded people, nothing you have fought for and won is guaranteed to last. Nothing, none of it. All of it could go away with a single Supreme Court justice like that. So if you really want to change the world, you have to realize that work is continual. It does not stop. And that work is personal, right? We have spent, the whole movement has spent its time trying to not see these problems so that we could go into middle white straight America and pretend like we're the same people when we're not. You know what I'm saying? So that's the first thing. If you see a homeless kid on the street, instead of trying to fuck him, make sure that kid can read, make sure that kid can write, make sure that kid has something to eat, make sure that kid is set up somewhere so that they don't have to be on these streets for their whole life. Be the parent. Don't be, you know what I'm saying? Be the parent. We need to change how we look at our community and understand that these kids, no one is going to fight for them except us. And we need to be able to give them what a lot of us never got, which is a safe place to grow up without having to worry about the person that's helping you do that. Like, and mind you, it sounds like I'm being just critical of like privileged white gay men. I'm not. I don't ever talk about the ballroom scene, right? Because it's difficult to criticize something that is so vital for so many kids. But what I will say is there's a lot of gay parents out here who are messing up the game, who instead of lifting kids up, they are a part of the line of exploitation because it happened to them. And they need to check themselves and grow up, right? So that's the first thing. It's the individual level. Reach out, find kids who need you. They're here. They're everywhere. They're everywhere you look in every major city in America. They are there. Help them with what you have. Because, and now I'm back to the white gay man, because you have more money than all of us. You know what I'm saying? You have more access than all of us. So who else is going to get it done? You guys have to be the example, right? That's that side. And then in terms of like the actual structural, white people need to accept that this is daunting, exhausting, and terrifying, dangerous work. Every single institution in this country is caught up in trying to re-enslave Black people. And if we are not willing to go into slavery, they shoot us in our fucking bedrooms while we sleep. and get away with it. Everything has to change. There is no, it's not like, this isn't Catholicism. You know what I'm saying? You can't like, okay, I'm gonna fuck up Monday through Saturday, and I'm gonna take this host, right, on Sunday, and then I'm gonna go to heaven because God forgives me. That's just not real. The whole thing needs to be destroyed. All of it. I don't know what's to come out. I can't tell you what's to come after it. But I know that we should all be invested if we really truly care the way we say we care. The whole thing needs to be destroyed. I'll give you an anecdote, then I'm going to shut up. I had a kid in my film, Desean. You guys have met him. At a certain point, Desean was like just disappearing and reappearing. I would see him for 2 weeks. He'd be gone for 4 months. I'd see him for a week. He'd be gone for a year. And I had kind of grown out of the Pier. I don't want to say I was play acting, but I was at Columbia University half the week, and then I would go on the Pier. So my privilege meters had altered my understanding of what it is to be a young Black poor kid, gay kid on the street. So I asked Krystal, I'm like, Krystal, why does Desean keep disappearing? And she said to me, Desean disappears because he's in and out of jail. Look him up. Of course, I should have thought of that. I should have needed Krystal to tell me that. I look him up and there he is. I go to visit him. He begs me, please mentor me. Please help me get out of this situation. And of course I said yes, right? And I took him out of the movie. I stopped filming his life. I gave him a camera. I invited him to live in my office. I took him to Columbia, introduced him to people, see what we could. I studied Black studies at Columbia. So, there's a lot of good people there who look for people like Desean to help them. And we kind of had him on a track. He would work that summer on my film, which would give me the material that I would need to get him into community college. And all we had to do was just hold him tight and keep him going in that way, no matter what was happening. One day he looks up to me and he says, Elegance, I don't know, like, I'm really proud of you and I really admire what you've done. I know you were homeless like me and you're Black and gay like me, but I got to be honest. Every time I walk down Christopher Street and I walk by these restaurants where these white people look at me like I don't belong in the city that I'm from, right? Every time I go to a store and someone follows me, every time a cop smashes my head up against the wall, it makes me feel like even if I did everything you did, that nothing would really get any better. I need to see everything that has oppressed me burnt to the ground to believe that something new is possible. That is what he says, should I be HIV positive? Right? That is a condemnation of the gay rights movement. That is a condemnation of the civil rights movement. So when you ask me, what do people need to do? They need to understand that there is a absolute necessity to destroy all of it and rebuild. And the only people who seem to be willing to do that are the right-wing conservative people. And that's a problem. That needs to be addressed. It makes me wonder who's who and what's really what if you're not willing to do that now. That's all I got.
No, thank you for sharing. Yeah, you touched on a little bit about the exploitation that these kids are facing on the street. Do you want to talk a little bit more, about that and how common prostitution and trafficking of gay and trans people are in New York City and the US at large? And maybe also talk a little bit about, the overpolicing and the violence that they're facing. And also if those of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you have any questions, feel free to add them into the chat and I will read them off for you guys.
I promise I won't yell at you if they're stupid. If there's no stupid questions. So I'm not going to yell at you. Don't be scared of me. I'm a really nice person. Do you want to talk about that? I'm sorry, I've talked a lot.
I think that, like the guy tells you in the film, a lot of people, it's easy to be trafficked because it's when someone offers you a couple of $100 to have sex on camera or just to have sex in general, or even less than that, when you have nowhere to go and no money and no resources and, no family, you'll take whatever you need in order to survive. So, I think that, it's easy for them. And also again, what Elliot is saying, that they're exploited by some of their own gay parents, their gay parents seeing them as adults, because of their surviving and because they're in a survival state. So they're being seen in this way. And even like their clients are seeing them in this way. But, they're still kids. And, it happens. And it's happening right now as we speak in all of our cities, literally. And not just gay kids, all kids. They're all, they're trafficked in a major, major, major way. Homeless gay kids, homeless kids, period.
Yeah. Most of the people that we're watching in porn, most of the people, you know what I'm saying, that we are looking at,
they're homeless.
At some point in their life story, they
a lot of them
have experienced this. A lot of them. Not to generalize. I don't want to. I'm not a person who has a problem with sex work, right? I think sex work is real work. It's been around since the beginning of time. It's not going anywhere, no matter what I feel about it anyway. So, but I do think that children engage in sex work. But I think that this is a part of the issue of gay culture as well. We talk a lot about the hypersexualization of American culture and how it affects young girls. We don't talk about how the hypersexualization of gay culture affects gay kids. We don't talk about that, right? It's if anything, we celebrate it. I remember when I started going out to bars and, the Backstreet Boys were a thing and like NSYNC was a thing. And like, you'd be in the room at these bars with like these 40-year-old, 30-year-old men who are like salivating over teenagers, like in front of everybody. Like it's cool.
Literally.
So I think that exploitation of sexuality is, we're also talking about, particularly on the gay side of things, we are patriarchs just like straight people. It's patriarchy without any sort of critique. It's unleashed patriarchy. Like how many times have I gone to a bar and some random white guy like pinches my nipple or like, grabs you. I remember one time I was on the pier filming, right? And I had my little one-man band, my little shoulder rig, a boom mic coming above and a light, clearly I'm occupied doing something. And to talk about how race and sexuality combine, there's a such thing called as temporal segregation. I'm not sure if a lot of well-meaning white people are aware that in most of America's cities, there's a time limit within which Black people can be outside. The cops are aware of it, right? Once the sun goes down, anybody who's Black out here possibly is probably committing a crime. And when we talk about profiling and stop and frisk, these cops are encouraged. Like the mayor of every city is like, gotta be tough on crime. So that means we need to create a formula within which to arrest people. And this idea of the time of day is a huge part of that formulation across this country. So I say this to say that as I'm filming in this red light district, this white man sees me filming and he runs over to me and shoves his hands down my pants and offers me $500 to go home with him. And I'm just like, dude, I don't know. I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. Like, what else? What do I need to say? I have a camera. I got people talking to me on it. Like clearly I'm not available for this right now. And that example is just to kind of show you, when you ask about sex trafficking, there's a racialized component to this for these kids as well, right? For the Black kids, especially because Black people, if we're not sexualized or kind of demonized through our violence, then we're invisible.
Race and class.
And class.
Because class is a big thing. Because not a lot of rich Black people are being sex trafficked,
Right.
Not a lot of rich white people are being sex trafficked. China, it's white people, it's poor white people and poor Black people that are being sex trafficked in all of our cities, because a lot of their parents don't have childcare. A lot of people are not watching them a lot of times a day, and it's easy for them to get away. And people to abduct them. So
if I were to say a solution, have sex with adults. Pay adults for sex. You know what I mean? Like,
right, or just find completely consenting people who don't need to get paid and don't, aren't lower class and struggling to just like feed themselves. Like that was something that people said a lot when you asked them why they do sex work, and it was like, I need to eat. And give someone a sandwich instead of putting your dick in their mouth, right? Like, like
and parents need to take care of their kids.
Yes.
Like essentially parents need to take care of their kids, and teachers need to be better teachers. Guidance counselors need to be better guidance counselors.
Yes.
Principals need to be better principals.
Yes.
Like, the infrastructure in which kids are learning in needs to change, and it needs to be better. Because if there's a lot of kids who are bullied, and it's hard for them to go to school and get educated because of, their sexuality.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't even have sexuality that young. They're just flamboyant, or they're masculine, vice versa. So it's like, that doesn't mean anything. That's just what they want to act like.
Right.
So, take care of your kids.
Please.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people too, like you mentioned, the gay parents or being a part of that exploitation as well. When people think of trafficking, they don't think of it as how it usually happens, where it is someone that you trust, someone that builds a bond with you, and they slowly break down your boundaries, and they put you in these situations where you feel indebted to them to do this thing. And that's how trafficking typically works in this country and in a lot of other countries. And oftentimes when you think of sex trafficking, you think of like someone being kidnapped in a really violent way and being held up in chains and things like this, like a very dramatized idea of it. But it's far more subtle, and it happens more often than people probably realize, actually.
Yeah, it's constant. It's happening right now. What I will say is, for those who have been through it, who you are and where you've been does not necessarily, rather what you've done does not define who you are. Like, there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. If at any point you decide to change your life and not do that, you'll find support if you look for it. I think it's important to know that, like,
and it's okay to do sex work in order to survive.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's not okay for kids to do sex work in order to survive. It's okay for adults to do sex work in order to survive, but it's not okay for kids, because kids should be kids. I think, me personally, that's my notion of it, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's a radical position at all. So yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions? We've got about 15 more minutes, and we can keep going if you two are up for it. But there's obviously a lot of themes encompassed in this film, and all of it is really important, I think, to have a discussion about.
Yeah. And thank you all for coming and being a part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Something that crossed my mind when watching it is you asked Krystal about where she saw herself in a few years, and with COVID happening, it made me wonder how, well, first, how you guys are doing being based in New York, and then also if you have been able to check in with some of these kids to see how they're doing. And obviously, when you look at the numbers too, there's been the Black community has been affected by COVID in a way that other communities haven't really been. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Krystal is happily married in stable housing, and she's in Pennsylvania, and she's doing really good. I'm really proud of Krystal. She's had her, I don't want to talk, she's fully affirmed in her gender now, which is really exciting. She that's why she came to New York, to achieve that, and she got it done.
Yeah.
And then Desean is not talking to me right now.
He's incarcerated.
Yeah.
Casper passed away, as you've seen in the movie.
Yeah.
And a lot of there's some people who have passed away, like Cheetah at the beginning.
Yeah.
Who says, Christopher Street, it's like a
story. It's like a playground. It's a fairy tale.
It's a place within a place.
Yeah.
Or it's like, I think that's what he says, it's a place within a place.
Yeah.
But that person has passed away. Some other people have passed away too.
Yeah. There's a lot of,
so many people have transformed too since this film, because it's been so long. It's almost a decade in the making.
It's also like a teen hangout as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. People I know who've gotten their, well, they had little 40-hour, the 40-hour-a-week jobs, and who, I have a friend who I met on the pier who was homeless, who, worked at Sunglass Hut, became a manager, toured with Rihanna. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's definitely some bright spots in there, in terms of how we're doing with COVID in New York. New York is kind of always in some stage of apocalypse anyway.
Mm.
So,
But COVID is like AIDS in the 80s. It's just risky. It's like sex, to some degree. It's like risky. Like, everybody's still outside. Nobody cares. They want to take the risk.
Yeah.
Because it's an old person's disease.
Right.
So, if you're younger, your chances are lower. So people are taking the chances. And once you have a drink, you're not really thinking about it anymore.
Yeah. But the ambulances are still going, and
but they have stopped though. They're not as frequent as they were before.
Yeah, they're less frequent right now.
Because they were very, very frequent.
Yeah, you'd hear them all. The only thing you would hear at night is ambulances, and that was.
We don't clap anymore at 7 p.m. We used to clap every day at 7 p.m. for the
essential workers.
For the essential workers, like.
Oh, I see. Okay. We've got a question here from Mark. He's asking, did making the film take an emotional toll, or is that a luxury you don't allow yourself to consider?
Oh
wow. Yeah, it took a huge emotional toll. When I met Casper, I thought the movie would end up being about him. Almost him and Krystal would be the two stories that I would follow, because I was just so impressed with his light. Like, he just had so much joy in him, considering what he had been through, and that just meant so much to me to, like, find someone like that who I could really kind of show that to the world with, and
he's also inspiring.
Yeah.
But,
like, what I can say is like, everything, when I went to, this is a movie full of triggers for me. It's all triggers. Pretty much every interaction in this film, I have an interaction in my life having been homeless, and the stuff that led me to being homeless, and then the stuff that got me out of being homeless, that was triggered to this film. And Krystal is with her family, and they're misgendering her. There is a part of me that is totally, the shadow of those conversations happened, where I was being disrespected for being gay, although nobody would say I was gay out loud. So you're kind of like, that feeling she's in, where you're just in this space where it's like, these people love me, but they're saying a lot of foul shit to me, like, and then the other side of that was, because I had never really come out exactly, I was pushed out. My mother gave me an ultimatum to get a girlfriend. Find a girlfriend, this much time to do it, and you don't do it by this, which is crazy anyway. Like, if I was straight, how do you even do that? You just walk out and get a girlfriend and come, like, who would I bring home that would be willing to just be my girlfriend just because my mother told me I had to have a girlfriend?
It's homophobic and it's sexist at the same time.
It's crazy. It's just crazy. But, I never had that conversation. I felt like I said before, I felt abandoned by the movement in that moment, because I didn't have the words. We didn't have the whole, like, heteronormative and queer and bi TPOC and all of it. None of that really reached into my working class Black household. So I just left. I didn't know what else to do, so that was triggering. So, and mind you, we shot 400 hours of footage that got whittled down to an 84-minute film. So everything that happened in real time that was traumatic happened to me again, hundreds and hundreds of times watching this footage back, which is why it took so long to do, because there were times I just have to be like, what, I can't do this. I need to do something else so that I can finish it. And I'm just grateful to my partner. We are married. I support gay marriage, even though I'm critical of its focus in our movement. And I'm grateful that I had Chester in my life, and I had, a few other key supports in my life to be there when this movie kicked my ass, and then to kick my ass when I needed to finish. So, yeah.
Well, we're glad that you were able to finish. It's definitely a powerful piece of film. And, one of the things that I was wondering too about it after I finished watching it was, for those of us who don't have these experiences, that intersection of being Black and queer and also experiencing homelessness. What are some of the main things that you really want people to take away from the film, and in terms of like actionable things that you think we can accomplish and to help and support?
Mentor young queer kids, see the homeless, see them, go out of your way to see them, look for them. You could tell.
You don't have to give them money all the time because a lot of people don't have money to even give them, but you can acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And also mental illness. Mental illness is something that we all really do need to pay attention to, and we need to understand it a bit more, because that's not really covered in Pier Kids, but a lot of the Pier Kids do deal with mental illness, and specifically they deal with traumas that trigger their mental illness.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a very real thing.
And I think that that's not just for Black homeless LGBT youth, that's for all homeless LGBT youth. They have serious triggers because of how they've been treated in life and what they've had to go through and deal with.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing I would say is, we have this election coming up. I feel like I'm in good company. Who knows who to vote for? But it is Florida, so anything can happen. I saw on the news the other day, Trump is talking about trying to mobilize his army basically to go stop Black people from voting. And we see what happens when Black people defend themselves against white people in this country. They get shot in their sleep. So, I would ask those who have the bravery to go out and help protect the vote of someone who is not like you. Not only do you vote for the right person, but put yourself on the line, because Trump,
those videos we saw in Chicago.
Yes. Just talking about is when the whole George Floyd thing really popped off. We saw this thing on Instagram where these like white college age women, I mean, they kicked these cops' ass. I've never seen anything like it in my life. They dragged him and ripped his shield off and all of it. And it was like 3 like white, like cheerleader type, girls. But cheerleaders could kick your ass anyway. But
it was very Kim Possible.
It was very Kim Possible. And it is what it is. There's a lot of white folks in this country who are like, you know what? My ancestors came here and killed all these Native Americans and enslaved your people so that I don't have to do much to be something. And I refuse to let that shit go. So I don't know what to do. I'm fighting. I will continue to fight, but we need more of the people who agree with us, who view this history as being corrupt, to actually roll up their sleeves and kind of take some of this heat so we don't have to be shot in our beds.
I also think it's time for a lot of us to return home. Even white LGBTQ people to return home and face, those bullies, and face those people in your family, and face, those people you grew up with.
I hear you,
and,
Sam.
Really have real conversations with them, and, and make them listen. Not literally make them listen, but, literally make them listen.
At least stop them from showing up to the voting places with their guns and trucks. Try it. Please.
Yeah, Sam says permits for politicians, and definitely I think voting this year isn't enough. And despite whatever your feelings are about the Democratic candidate, definitely was not my first choice. But unfortunately, this is more. There's more at stake than just Joe Biden. Unfortunately, there's the next Supreme Court justice pick, so there's a lot at stake. It's an ideological issue as well. Sam says he'll bring his wine. All right.
I love it.
But yeah, and just doing things like becoming a poll worker, being a part of that process, being more engaged as well, ensuring that votes are counted this year. That's going to be a huge, crucial point as well. Yeah, thanks, Sam. So it's 9:30. do you guys have any, last minute things that you would like to share with everyone before I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, the founder of Harvey Milk Festival and the programmer for this year's fabulous Independent Film Festival in a minute. But before we sign off, I'd really like to hear your last minute thoughts.
Yeah, I just want people to donate to this festival because I think it's important to have spaces like this to share work. Oh, you can't hear me. I think it's important for people to donate to this festival so that, we continue to have spaces like this that share work like this with communities internally and externally, and that, it's happening. That's why we wanted to play this festival, because we think it's important to share these stories with everyone around the country, because even if a couple of people hearts change, a couple of people could turn into hundreds of people could turn into thousands of people.
Don't lose hope. Use your anger to have radical hope. But we need safe spaces to share these, share our lives with, and witness each other's existence. And say what you think when you're right in a room full of people who are wrong. Say out loud what you think. You'd be shocked who's in that room who needed you to say that, to give them the courage to speak up too. Don't just let the fuck shit happen because you're scared. Speak up. People need to hear what you think. People need to know how to think. A lot of people have no, and bring your 9. Make sure you it's loaded. But yeah, that's all I got. Thank you so much for this. And keep an eye out for my new projects that are coming out. I've got a feature documentary called The Harlem Hellfighters, which is about the 1st Regiment of Black troops to fight in a world war and their leader, James Reese Europe. It's a really interesting take on minstrelsy and the history of racial representation in music. And also I have my feature film debut coming out. I'll start shooting it very soon. The movie is called The Inspection. It's about a homeless kid who joins the Marine Corps to change his life, but ends up having to conceal his attraction to his drill instructor in order to survive boot camp during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It will be the first major motion picture made about Don't Ask, Don't Tell from a Black queer perspective, and you'll be hearing about it on the interwebs very, very soon. We've got some amazing partners, and please go out and support it, and thank you for your time tonight.
Yes. And follow Pier Kids on social media. On Instagram, you can just look up as Pier Kids.
Yes.
And you can find us through Pier Kids.
Yes. Much love to y'all. Be safe. Take care of each other.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Shannon, why don't you go ahead and close out tonight's Q&A session for us?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to you both for joining us and for, going deep, because I know it's not easy to talk about those things, especially, sharing your experience and being someone that lived on the streets. I feel like that is, it's important. I know it's a hard conversation, but it's important. And you're right about creating safe spaces, and that's the whole purpose of our organization, is creating safe spaces and amplifying voices of minorities, and trying to make sure that we are aware of our community and for folks that need to be heard and need to be lifted up. And so that's a big focus why we are really grateful that your film was our opening night film, and that we got to hear from you both. You both are amazing, and I'm really looking forward to your new work. So I hope folks will definitely go. If you go to harveymilkfestival.org, you can also find their links for their social media as well. But yeah, definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work. So thank you.
Our cat hi.
So your cat.
Oh, did you see? Yeah, my cat's been jumping behind me.
Say hi, Casper.
You're like, I have to show my cat. Sorry, your cat's cuter than mine. That's cool. But yeah, so there's other really wonderful films. And for those folks that maybe are watching on Facebook, we had a short film called Black Trans Women. That was the short film that was featured before. And it's really wonderful for us to have the opportunity to have this platform with cinema, to be able to share these stories and to get them in front of folks that can take something from it, learn, educate, share. You know, I think this is the purpose of cinema, is to help us walk through in someone else's shoes and change our perspective. And so we hope that you will join us with the rest of our films and support the work that we're doing, and support the filmmakers, because you never know what they're up to next. And I think the work that everyone's doing is really important, and a very difficult year with it being COVID. So I think the more we support one another, I think the stronger we are as a community as a whole. And I think that's super crucial. And I think that's what we take from 2020, is that we just got to be there for one another, and keep lifting each other up. And if we see someone falling, it's just having those simple conversations, like you said earlier, of if you see someone that's homeless, just to ask, just start a conversation. There's a lot of that disconnect, and it's difficult, especially right now with COVID. But there's a lot of alienation, and I think just like checking in with folks is really important right now. And just, you know, even just like a nod or a visual, like I see you. I think especially with COVID, if you're a little nervous about getting close to someone, but I think it's just the little small things that we can do that really could change someone's day. So I think that's what we can all take from that. But you can visit the HarveyMilkFestival.org and check out more films and pick up tickets. And we hope everyone stays safe. And we're looking forward to 2021 and more work to be done. So stay tuned.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.